He didn't kiss me first. He didn't ask if I was ready. He just unbuttoned his shirt, unbuckled his silence, and took what he believed he owned. Not cruel, just final. Like a man honoring a transaction, not touching a woman. And I didn't cry. Not then. Because somewhere beneath the fear, something else had begun to burn. If that first night left questions you need answered, like this video, and subscribe for more stories that begin in shadows and don't end where you expect. They didn't ask if I wanted to go. They didn't pack a suitcase. They just sent the car and the silence that came with it. It was black, long, polished like it had never touched real roads. I sat in the back seat, a folder on my lap, my hands still sticky with the flour I hadn't washed off from the bakery that morning. In it, a letter with my father's signature and 2 lines scrawled in blue ink. "You're the last thing I can offer. He'll take care of the rest." He didn't sign it, Dad. He signed it Edward Bennett, like a man closing a deal. The farther the car moved from town, the more the wind changed. Sharper, hungrier, like it had teeth. Fog gathered around pine trunks, and wet leaves slapped the windshield like warnings. I stopped asking where we were going after the driver looked up at me through the mirror and flinched. We drove for hours, until the land bled into cliffs and sea. Then the road narrowed. Then it ended. And then there was only Ashridge. The house sat like a forgotten word, spoken once, too heavy to repeat. Tall and bruised by time, with stone walls that swallowed light and windows like eyes that had seen too much. Ivy grew wild across the east wing, strangling the old chimneys like it was trying to put the place to sleep. The car door clicked open behind me. The driver didn't wait. I stepped into the wind, and it pushed against my chest like a hand. And still, the front door stood closed, tall, oak, and waiting. I didn't knock. I stood. 1 minute. 2. Then the door opened. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask my name. He just looked at me like someone who had expected a box and received a breathing body instead. "You're the Bennett girl?" I nodded, gripping the folder like a weapon. "Clara," I said. "Clara Bennett." His eyes didn't blink. Names short, debts long. Then he turned and walked inside. I followed. Not because I had to, but because the wind behind me didn't leave any other option. The inside of Ashridge was colder than outside. Not in temperature, though my bones did ache, but in absence. The walls were high, the ceilings impossible. A grandfather clock ticked, like it had no one to talk to. The lights were dim, and they weren't golden. They were amber, like old teeth. He led me past a fireplace that hadn't been lit in what felt like years, past a portrait of a woman with a mouth too tight to smile, and eyes that followed me even when I looked away. I wanted to ask if that was his mother. I didn't. I was still trying to keep my breath even. "You'll stay in the east room," he said. His voice was low, not unkind, just unfinished. Like every word he said had to fight its way out of his ribs first. I nodded again. I seemed to have lost the ability to speak in full sentences. "You'll have food, heat, quiet. I won't bother you. Don't bother me." And just like that, we had a contract. Not a marriage, not a home, not even a shared life, just a ceasefire. The east room was at the top of a narrow staircase, the kind that groaned under your weight like it was keeping count. The hallway smelled like cedar and cold iron. The wallpaper peeled like old skin, and the door to my room didn't have a lock or a handle, just a pull ring, old and brass, cool to the touch. Inside, the room was bare. A bed, a desk, a single lamp on a dresser, a window facing the cliffside, shuttered. The only thing that felt chosen was the folded blanket on the end of the bed. Blue wool, clean. Still warm, maybe. I turned, and he was gone. I sat on the bed, folder still in my lap, and exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. I opened it again. There were no terms, no schedule, no warning, just a single page. In settlement of outstanding debt. Acceptance in full. Signed by my father, co-signed by Lucian Vale. That was his name. I hadn't even known it until that moment. That night. I didn't unpack. I didn't cry. I didn't dream. I laid still, like furniture, and listened. Somewhere in the house, a door closed. Somewhere else, footsteps paused, then didn't move again. In the dark, I pulled the blanket to my chest. It smelled of ash and something familiar I couldn't name. Not cologne, not smoke. Memory, not mine. His. I didn't know then what kind of man Lucian Vale was, only that he lived alone on a cliff and opened his door not with a smile, but like he was letting in a ghost. And I wasn't sure if I had died a little to walk through it. But I remember this. Before I fell asleep, I looked at the empty corner of the room and thought, this place doesn't want me. Then I remembered the way he had looked at me, and I thought again, maybe it wasn't the house that was waiting. Maybe it was him. They didn't lock the door, but I couldn't open it. The east room was meant to be mine, yet it felt borrowed. The kind of space a person keeps ready for someone they hope never comes back. Nothing was broken, but nothing welcomed me either. The windows didn't open. The dresser drawers were empty except for a single brass button and a folded handkerchief, embroidered with someone else's initial. L.I. spent the morning walking the perimeter of the room. 3 walls, 1 window, no mirror. I tried the shutters. They groaned but stayed closed. When I pushed too hard, dust clouded into my lungs like breath long held and suddenly lost. A knock didn't come. No breakfast tray, no voice from the hallway. Was, unmistakably, on my own. It took me until midday to gather enough nerve to leave the room. I didn't know the rules. Weren't wives supposed to know the rules? Then again, I hadn't had a wedding. Just a signature and a stare that still lived behind my eyes. The hallway outside was silent but not still. There's a kind of quiet that feels like listening, and Ashridge held that kind of hush. Like every wall had been waiting for years to hear someone's footsteps again. Mine were soft, barefoot, out of defiance or fear. I wasn't sure. I passed, a long mirror covered in a white sheet. The cloth moved slightly as I passed, even though there was no draft. I found the kitchen by accident. It was sunken and old, filled with copper pans and the lingering smell of something burned. Eggs, maybe. Or memory. A cast-iron kettle rested on the stove. Cold. There was a single teacup in the sink, and beside it, a spoon. Still wet. Someone had been here. Not long ago. I turned toward the garden door, just to feel something open, but it was bolted with a chain that had rusted into place. Through the pane of dusty glass, I saw the sea, gray and churning, beating against the cliff, like a slow, steady heart. I stayed in the kitchen for an hour, pretending to look for tea. I think I just needed proof the world still included color. Ashridge muted everything, sound, light, even memory. There were no family photographs, no laughter buried in the corners, only objects, scrubbed of meaning, except the piano. It was in the parlor, tucked against the west wall, upright, closed, and silent. I ran my fingers across the dust on its surface, not to play it, just to make a mark. Don't touch that. I turned. Lucien stood in the doorway, not angry, just there, like he'd always been there. I wasn't going to play, I said, That's not the point. He walked past me and wiped the piano clean with his sleeve. Like it mattered. Like it still belonged to someone who cared what it looked like. Do you play? I asked. He didn't answer. He sat down on the edge of the old velvet armchair and looked out the window. I followed his gaze. The sea was throwing itself against the rocks like it wanted to disappear. That piano used to fill this house, he said, voice lower than before. Now it makes silence louder. I didn't respond. What could I say to that? What do you say to a man who speaks in riddles you're not sure you want to understand? Instead, I asked, was she a musician? He looked at me then. Really looked. And I saw it. The flicker. Not pain exactly. Regret. Or maybe something too old for a name. She used to sing, he said. But never here. Then he stood and walked away. That night, I found the coat. It was folded over the back of the desk chair when I returned to the east room. My own cardigan was still draped on the bed. I hadn't left the room in anything but that. But this coat was heavier. Wool. Worn at the cuffs. Lined with something that used to be satin. It didn't smell like him. Not quite. It smelled like before him. Like old books, rain on stone, the ghost of tobacco. There was a note folded in the inner pocket. No signature, just a sentence. It gets colder at night. I pressed the paper to my palm. My heart beat once, hard, and then kept going like nothing had happened. I didn't see him the next day or the one after. But I knew he was there. In the way the fireplace stayed warm, even though I hadn't lit it. In the way the kettle started to whistle just when I needed it. In the sound of boots outside my door, never stopping, never knocking. He was leaving. Me space. Or maybe he was circling the edge of something, afraid to fall in. I started writing again. Just little things. Lines in the margins of a recipe book I found in the kitchen drawer. Not poems, not stories, confessions I used to hum when I was afraid. I don't remember the sound of my mother's voice. I want to belong. Somewhere, even if it hurts. I didn't know if he'd ever read them, but I left the book open on the table anyway. On the fourth night, I didn't sleep. The room was too warm, the blanket too soft. The coat still draped over the chair like a second spine. I opened the window. The wind hit me full in the chest, salt and dark. Below, the sea moaned like something wounded. The cliff edge just beyond my sight, and then a single light moved in the hallway below. Not flickering, just steady, like someone walking with purpose. I waited, but no one came. That was when I knew. He was watching. Not to own, not to haunt, to protect. But only if I let him. And I wasn't sure yet if I wanted that kind of safety. The kind that comes with a cost. The house had too many doors. Some led nowhere. Just closets without shelves, rooms without windows, a stairwell that ended in a brick wall. Others refused to open at all, sealed as if whatever was inside had been told never to come out again. But the worst was the door that wouldn't close. It was at the end of the north hallway, just past the conservatory with the glass roof half smashed by wind. I found it by accident. I'd gone looking for sunlight, but the day was gray again, and the garden path slick with saltwater spray. When I turned back, the wind pushed the door open behind me. A slow, steady moan of hinges that hadn't been touched in years, and it stayed open, no matter how hard I tried to shut it. Inside, a small sitting room. Dust thick on every surface. A chaise longue draped in white cloth. Books stacked like they'd been left mid-sentence. A single teacup on the windowsill. Cracked. A coat, women's, still hanging behind the door. The air was heavier here, not colder, not musty, just watched. And then I saw it. A photo. Face down on the side table, half covered by a brittle page of sheet music. I turned it over. She was beautiful. Dark hair, bare shoulders, mouth turned just enough to suggest she hated having her picture taken. She was sitting on a stone ledge with the sea behind her. This sea. This house. She'd lived here, loved here, maybe, or been kept here. I put the photo back, face down. Some things are better left undared. That night, I found Lucian in the study. 18. Wasn't locked. He wasn't drinking. He was just sitting. Fire low, jacket off. His shirt cuffs rolled up, veins visible beneath the skin. I stood at the door like I had something to say. I didn't. He looked up. Only once. You went to her room. I didn't ask who. I didn't need to. The wind pushed the door, I said. He nodded, as if that made sense. It never stays shut, he said. She was always the one leaving, even before she actually did. I waited. For him to say more. For him to tell me what happened. Where she went. If she died. If he lost her. If he let her go. He didn't. Why keep it open? I asked. He turned to the fire, voice lower now. Because I wasn't the one who closed it. I didn't know what to do with that, so I stepped forward, sat across from him. Let the quiet stretch. Do you miss her? I asked. A pause. His jaw tensed. His hand gripped the armrest tighter, knuckles sharp against pale skin. No. The kind of no that meant yes, or worse. Still, I should have left. That was what a smarter woman would have done. But I stayed. What did she leave behind? I asked. Lucian looked at me then. Really looked. As if weighing what I could hold. What I could understand. Everything, he said finally. Everything she said she'd take. He leaned forward. The fire lit his face in orange shadow. I gave her this house, this cliff, this silence, and it still wasn't enough. I swallowed, my hands folded in my lap. And me? I asked. You're not her. But I'm in her place. He said nothing. Just reached for the glass on the table, lifted it halfway to his lips, then set it down again. Later, I walked the hallway again. Not to find her. To find me. The woman in the photo had once taken up space here. Her voice had echoed. Her scent had lingered. I wasn't trying to become her. I just needed to know how not to disappear the way she did. That night, I left the east, room door ajar. A test, a signal, a surrender. At some point I heard his steps, measured, heavy, not hiding. He paused outside. The floor creaked. I waited. He didn't enter. But when I woke in the morning, the coat I'd left on the chair was gone, and replaced by a book, a poetry volume, worn spine, one page dog-eared. I opened it, underlined. You are not the echo of woe. Another. You are the silence she could never hold. The next afternoon, I found the door had closed. Her room, locked from the inside. No key, no wind, just quiet. And for the first time, it felt like maybe, not all doors have to stay open, not to be remembered. It was the kind of cold that lived under your skin, the kind that crept into the marrow and whispered, "You're still alone, aren't you?" The storm rolled in without thunder, just wind, wet and whispering against the windows like a secret no one wanted to keep. I lay in bed listening to it. The house creaked. The shutters moaned. Even the walls seemed to breathe. Didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, though I was, but because I couldn't tell what I wanted more. to be left alone, or to be found. Around midnight, the lights flickered, then went dark. No warning, just a sigh, and then absence. I sat up. The coat he'd given me was still draped over my shoulders. My hands clutched the book he'd left me, still open to the line that had unmoored something in my chest. You are the silence she could never hold. I hadn't heard his footsteps tonight. No hallway creak, no kettle whistle, just dark, and the sea outside, wilder now, crashing like it had something to say and no language to say it in. I lit the candle on my desk. It flickered hard, then settled into a quiet flame. And then I heard it. A door opening. Not mine, but close. Then another sound. Not footsteps. Breath. Shallow. Drawn tight. I stepped into the hallway, the candle cupped in both hands. The air felt different. Charged. Like standing near something that might bite or break. Lucian stood at the end of the hall, shirt undone at the collar. Eyes glazed, not with drink, but something deeper. He didn't see me at first. His hand was pressed flat, against the wall, as if he needed the house to hold him upright. Lucian, he turned slowly, not startled, not angry, just there. He looked at me like someone waking up from a fever. The lights went out, I said, voice quieter than I meant. They do that sometimes, he murmured. Another pause. A breath. Then, from him, I heard your door open. I thought, I heard something. You did. We stood in that stretch of hallway, 10, maybe 12 feet apart. But it felt like an entire childhood. Every time I'd been left behind. Every moment I'd swallowed instead of asking to stay. And then he stepped closer, not quickly, not with purpose, just one slow step, like he was testing if the floor would forgive him. You didn't call for me, he said. No. Why? The candle wavered. My fingers felt the wax start to pool. Because if I said your name, I whispered, I would have needed you to answer. That stopped him. Something in his face fractured, subtly. A shift in the way his eyes softened. Or maybe how his jaw unclenched. He stepped once more, now close enough that I could feel it. The heat of him. Not his skin. His ache. It pulsed off, him like light from a fire you hadn't dared sit beside. He raised a hand, but didn't touch me. His fingers hovered, just above my cheek. 1 inch. Maybe less. You don't have to ask, he said. And still. He didn't move closer. He left. The space. The choice. And for the first time, I reached. I leaned forward, not into his hand, but his presence. Letting my forehead rest against his chest. No arms, no pull, just breath. His shirt was cold with the sea air, but his heart was steady beneath it. 1 beat, then another. A rhythm. Something I could count. He didn't hold me. He let me stand there, against him, until my breathing slowed. Until I felt the tears gather behind my eyes, but didn't let them fall. And then, he stepped back. His hand finally touched my hair. Just once. Then he turned away. Not as rejection, but as surrender. I returned to my room. Left the door open. He didn't come back. But before dawn, when I rose to close the shutters, I found something on the windowsill. A matchbox. And beneath it, a slip of folded paper. In his handwriting. I didn't answer because I didn't want you to need me. I wanted you to want me. I didn't light the candle again that night. I let the dark wrap around me. Let the waves scream outside. let my own name echo in the space where his almost was. That was the first time I knew what it meant to be seen. Not as an obligation, not as a replacement, but as someone whose silence could be chosen. I had never played piano. Not properly. Not with both hands. Not the way people do when they think anyone is listening. But that morning, after the night he let me rest against him without holding me, I walked into the parlor and laid my fingers on the keys. They were cold, stiff, some stuck. Others rang too long, like they didn't know when to stop. I pressed one, D, then another, F. The sound wasn't beautiful, but it was real. The lid of the piano creaked when I opened it fully. Inside, everything looked clean, until I saw it. A faint gouge across the inside rim, just beneath the strings. Not a crack. Not wear. A scar. Someone had taken something sharp to the wood, not to break it, but to leave a mark. It wasn't accidental. It wasn't repairable. I touched it. Not with reverence, but curiosity. What kind of silence needs to be carved? I didn't hear Lucian come in, but I felt him. A shift in air. That impossible stillness he carried, like he'd learned how to move without asking permission from the space he entered. You found it. I didn't turn. You left it. A pause. Then he moved beside me, slow. Not close, but close enough that I could smell the faintest scent of him. Leather, salt, paper. She did that, he said. Her? Before she left. She said the piano always sounded too perfect. Like it didn't know what real pain was. Let my fingers drift down the keys again. And you kept it. I keep everything I can't forgive. There was no bitterness in his voice. Just fact. Like memory was a kind of architecture, and scars were how you made it stand. I closed the lid gently, careful not to let it slam. You don't play anymore? Not since she carved it. Why? Because now every note echoes something I didn't say. That stopped me. I looked up. What didn't you say? He held my gaze. This time he didn't turn away. That I wanted her to stay. That I would have changed. That loving her scared me, but losing her terrified me. A silence opened between us. Not empty. Dense. And me? I asked. You haven't left yet. He walked to the window, pressed his palm to the fogged glass. I don't know how to speak in real time, Clara. I only ever confess to ghosts. That afternoon, I didn't eat. I didn't leave the parlor. I sat beside the piano and stared at the gouge. I imagined her, hands holding the blade, dragging it slow, steady, like a promise, like a curse. Lucien didn't come back that night. No kettle whistled. No boots passed my door. I should have felt abandoned. Instead, I felt uncovered, like grief had opened him a fraction, and I had looked too far inside. Near midnight, I returned to the parlor, lit the candle on the mantel, let it bleed warm light over the polished lid, and I played. Only 4 notes. A tune I remembered from somewhere soft, maybe my mother's kitchen, or a dream too old to date. I didn't know the melody, but I let it live. Each note felt like a letter I'd never written. Each pause was its own confession. The next morning, the piano was open, not the lid, the inside. A single page of sheet music lay over the keys, not printed, handwritten. Title, Forsino signature, but I didn't need one. Later that day, I found Lucian on the garden path, staring at the cliff's edge. The wind tore at his coat. The sea threw itself upward like it wanted him to fall. He didn't hear me approach. I played it, I said. He didn't look back. I know. Did it sound like a ghost? No, he said quietly. It sounded like someone who's still here. I stepped beside him. Why write it for me? Because you played the piano even with the scar in it. He turned. His eyes were tired, but no longer hiding. And maybe, he said, I need someone who can love what's been cut. That night, I didn't leave my door open. I left it, half closed. Not a test. Not an invitation. Just a space. A maybe. And before I fell asleep, I heard it again. Footsteps. Not approaching. Lingering. A presence not asking to be let in. Just waiting to be chosen. The letter arrived with the morning. Fog slipped under my door like a secret too tired to wait until breakfast. No stamp. No seal. Just my name, written in a hand I hadn't seen in years. Jane. My sister. I sat on the floor, knees bent beneath my nightgown, and stared at the envelope as if it might vanish if I blinked. She had been gone 5 years. No forwarding, address, no goodbye. Just absence, and 1,000 imagined reasons why. The letter was short. Clara, I heard about the wedding. If you can still call it that. I'm at St. Augustine's retreat, in Maine. If you want out, say the word. There's room here for you. I won't ask questions. Just come. Jane. No apology. No explanation. But then again, when had we ever needed those? We were born into silence, raised on it. I didn't go to breakfast. I didn't touch the piano. I sat on the window seat of the East Room, staring at the sea, and felt something unravel. Something I hadn't even realized I'd woven around myself. A future. Here. With Lucian, or maybe near him. I wasn't in love. Not yet, but I was becoming something in this house. Something slow and steady in mine. And for the first time in my life, no one was telling me who I had to be to stay. By noon, I found him outside. Lucian stood where the cliff bent outward, his coat drawn tight, eyes narrowed against the salt wind. He heard my steps before I spoke. I got a letter, I said. He turned, unreadable. From someone who left, I added. They want you back? They want me somewhere I can choose myself. He was quiet. Then, you can choose here too. Can I? He met my eyes. You think I kept you? Didn't you? The words didn't come out cruel, just honest, like a wound pressing, gently against skin, testing whether it still hurt. Lucian stepped closer, but not close enough to touch. I asked you to stay once. I won't ask again. His voice was calm. That was what gutted me. Not anger, permission. That night, the house felt different, not colder, not darker, just quieter, like it knew something was about to be lost. I walked the hallway slowly, stopping at the study, the piano, her room. Each one said nothing. Each one waited. In the kitchen, the kettle was warm, but no tea had been made. He was making space for my leaving, and that made it worse. Back in the East Room, I packed slowly, not because I wanted to go, but because I needed to know what it felt like to almost leave. I folded the coat he gave me, the poetry book, the matchbox. Then I stopped. There was something. Under the bed, a box, plain, wooden, no lock. Inside, a photograph. Old, sepia-toned. 2 girls, maybe 10 and 12, standing in front of a bakery. One of them was me. The other, Jane. Behind the photo, a note, Lucian's handwriting again. I asked someone to find her, just in case you ever wanted to. I sat on the floor, hands trembling. He hadn't spoken, hadn't tried to win me. He'd just given me the way out. Before I even asked, I didn't sleep. At dawn, I walked the garden path one last time. The grass was wet, the sea quieter. He was there, Lucian, at the cliff's edge. Same coat, same silence. You knew I'd come, I said. I was hoping you would. To say goodbye? He didn't answer. I moved closer. Close enough to smell that blend of old books and sea wind I'd come to memorize. If I leave, I whispered, what will you do? Keep the lights on. That broke something inside me. Not loudly, just a quiet fracture. I reached for his hand. This time, he let me. His fingers were cold, but closed around mine like something remembered. I'm not choosing her, I said. Not yet. Then who are you choosing? Me. His thumb moved once, slowly, across my knuckles. That's the right answer. We didn't kiss. We didn't say stay. We just stood there. Two people at the edge of something that didn't need a name yet. When I returned to the room, I unpacked only the book and placed it on the windowsill. Still open. Still mine. There are two kinds of silence, one that protects and one that punishes. I had lived most of my life in the second. After my mother died, our house had filled with the sound of things left unsaid. My father stopped speaking to me in full sentences. Jane ran instead of grieving. I stayed. Staying doesn't mean strength. Sometimes it just means you have nowhere else to go. The door was locked. Not hers. Mine. The east room. At first I thought it was stuck, but the knob wouldn't turn. Not even halfway. I stood in the hallway barefoot, hair still damp from a storm I hadn't known was coming. Wind tore at the windows. The sea below groaned. And then I heard it. A voice, soft, familiar, from the other side of the door. You shouldn't have stayed. My breath hitched. You're not her. He'll leave you too. I stepped back. The voice wasn't real. Couldn't be. But it sounded like someone I hadn't heard in years. Jane. Not her grown voice. Her childhood one. The one that used to crawl into bed with me after bad dreams and whisper, "Don't tell Dad." I moved down the hall. Fast. Unthinking. To the only door I hadn't opened since the night I found the piano's scar. Her room. Lucien's ghost. The one he let walk out. The one I'd tried not to become. The door creaked as I pushed it open. Nothing had changed. Dust. A covered chair. The coat behind the door. But there, on the floor, was something new. A photograph. Curled at the edges. Discarded. I picked it up. My mother. Not young, but not sick yet. She stood beside a man. Not my father. Taller. Darker. The background was unfamiliar, but the expression on her face wasn't. She was smiling. Softly. Not for the camera. For him. I carried the photo to the study. Lucian was there, of course. He always was when I needed him least. And most. Did you know her? I asked, holding out the picture. He took it carefully. Looked once. Blinked. She used to come here. Before it was mine. Before I could afford to own anything. Why didn't you tell me? Because she wasn't your story. He handed it back. No explanation. No secret spilled. Just dignity. And the heavy pause of someone who knows grief doesn't always come from loss. Sometimes it comes from knowing. That night, I couldn't sleep. The voice didn't return. But the feeling did, like someone was knocking. Not to be let in, but to remind me they'd once lived here. I sat by the window and thought about doors, about how easy it was to close one and think you'd ended something. But echoes don't die in silence. In the morning, I packed again. Not to leave. To walk. Lucian met me at the garden gate. "Where are you going?" he asked. Not possessive, just steady. To see if I'm still afraid. Of what? Of what's mine. I walked the edge of the cliff until the wind no longer chilled me. Then I turned back. Not to the house. Not to Lucian. To the east room. The door was still closed, but this time it opened easily. Inside, the room was warm. Sunlight leaked in through the window. On the desk sat the poetry book, my matchbox, and a letter. Not Jane's. Not Lucien's. My mother's. I opened it with shaking hands. "Clara, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't keep the promise I made you. That I'd always be there when you woke up from a bad dream. But I want you to know something I never said aloud. You were never meant to stay small to survive. You don't have to be quiet to be safe. You are not here to carry our silences. Leave if you must. But don't run. Walk. Choose. And when you stand still again, let it be because you love where you are, not because you were afraid to go. Mom, I didn't cry. Not yet. But something loosened in my chest. Something old. Something I hadn't even realized I'd kept in a drawer inside myself, labeled too heavy. That evening, I went to Lucian. He didn't speak, just looked at me like a man watching someone he expected to vanish. I'm not going anywhere, I said. He exhaled slowly. Why? Because this time I opened the door myself. And there was no ghost behind it, just me. He reached for me then, not with arms, with his voice. I've been waiting for you to say that, he said. Not to stay, to know why. And you? I asked. I stopped living in her room the day you played the piano. We stood in silence. No storm, no letters, no past tugging at our heels, just wind. And us, and all the things we hadn't yet said, no longer screaming to be heard. By the end, it wasn't about love, not in the way people write about it, not the grand, sweeping kind that drowns everything else. It was about presence, the quiet kind. The kind that waits in the next room, doesn't ask, doesn't need. The kind that notices when you leave the window cracked and puts a book beside the bed just in case. The kind you stay for, not because you're afraid to leave, but because you finally want to wake up where you are. That morning, I opened every window in the east room. The air was sharp, full of salt and late October. The wind curled around the curtains like a cat, and the house didn't seem to mind. It had stopped creaking like it was protesting my presence. Now it listened, settled, like it understood something had shifted. The door no longer stuck. The hinges had loosened somehow, maybe on their own, maybe by waiting. I ran my fingers along the frame, still worn, still chipped, but open. Lucian didn't knock. He never had. He just appeared, soft-footed, like a memory. He stood in the hallway, a mug in each hand, and waited until I nodded. He stepped in, placed one mug on the windowsill. Tea, no sugar, no questions. I thought I'd find you gone, he said. I replied, but not this morning. He sat in the chair beside the desk, same one I'd written my confessions in. I wondered if he'd ever read them. I never asked. We sipped in silence. The waves below were restless, but not angry. The kind of sea you could sit beside for hours and still not know. Do you want me to stay? I asked finally. Lucien didn't look up right away. He was tracing the rim of his cup with his thumb like it helped him think straighter. I don't want to need you to, he said. But yes. I breathed. Not in relief. Just breath. Finally aloud. Then I will. I said. Not forever. Not for always. But today. He nodded, eyes steady on mine. That's the most I've ever asked for. We didn't move in together. We didn't rearrange the rooms. He didn't empty drawers for me. And I didn't erase the photograph she left behind. But I placed one of mine beside it. A picture of me and Jane. Back when we were both too young to know what we'd carry later. Balance, not replacement. Over the weeks that followed, the house changed in ways that had nothing to do with renovation. Lucian started leaving doors open, books out, windows unlatched. I planted herbs in a crooked wooden box beside the kitchen door. He didn't help, but he watched through the glass. And once, when I wasn't looking, he watered them. One morning, I woke to find my cardigan folded beside the fireplace, warm and smelling faintly of cedar. I hadn't worn it in days. The coat he gave me stayed hanging on the hook. I didn't wear it anymore, but I didn't return it either. Some gifts are better left waiting, just in case the wind shifts. We had our first argument in the conservatory. About nothing, really. He said something sharp about Jane. I said something sharper back. We both went quiet. The old kind of silence. I walked outside. Let the air bite. When I returned, there was a piece of paper slipped under my teacup. I speak in defense too often. I'm learning. Don't go. He didn't need to sign it. I stayed. Winter came. Snow layered the cliffs in white sheets, and the sea turned dark as ink. The windows fogged faster. The kettle whistled louder. The house breathed, and so did we. Some nights he stayed beside me. Not every night. Not even most. But sometimes I'd feel the shift in weight on the mattress. The warmth of another presence, not demanding, not expectant. Once, I reached out, touched his hand in the dark. He laced his fingers through mine like it was a story we both knew but had never said aloud. I still write, sometimes in the margins of old books, sometimes on napkins, once on his palm, when I couldn't say it aloud. This isn't a rescue. It's a return. He read it. Didn't wipe it off until the next morning. One night, weeks later, we were sitting in the parlor, fire low, piano untouched. Why did you really let her go? I asked. He looked into the flames. Because I loved her more than she loved herself. And that's not love. That's prison. And me? You made your own key. So the room's not locked? He shook his head. Not anymore. I don't know if we'll last forever. I don't think that's the point. Some love stories aren't meant to be etched in stone. They're meant to be lived like breath, held close, let go, returned to. A house can have 1,000 rooms and still feel empty, or just two voices learning how to share space. This morning, I left the door wide open. Not for him, for me. If this story moved you, even in the quietest way, leave a like to let us know. And if you'd like more stories that linger long after the last word, don't forget to subscribe. Your presence here means more than you think.